Hey, I recently interviewed Felix from Germany, one of the WTC, the winners of WTC, and he got me going. One of the things that he said was, well, we could do all of this and then you could figure that statistics out. And all of a sudden I'm doing math. I hate math. But, I did it for you guys and for myself because I wanted to know. So I've done a little bit of analysis on some of the things from the WTC, and so something like individual scoring, strength of schedule, stuff. So this is the meta that I've done for that. Let me just show this. Right. So more data from the WTC 25. So if we're looking at individual scores, then it turned out to be a little bit of a funny exercise for me to count up the placement of the individual players on a team and figure out who did best that way. So if we're looking at the teams who ended up in the top, Germany has the best overall placement of all players. Makes sense, right? But, they might have had one player that did worse. All of their players ended up in the top 20. Individually ended up in the top 20. Spain also had really good placement. They had one player that didn't end in the top 20, but he still ended up in the top half. And then USA 2, my team, we had two players that did really well, one player that just missed the 20 top player mark, and then we had one player that dropped down in the rankings because he took all the hardest hits. So the ranking turns around massively if we just look at individual placement here. Does that tell us anything about how the team scored? And no, it doesn't. But it is an interesting exercise for me to see how that would change up everything. And you can see it would massively change up how the teams actually went. Because Australia, for instance, they had like one player who did really well, and the rest of the players didn't really do terribly well. So they would end up in 7th place if it was just a matter of individual players, count them all up. Where did they land? Which is not. It's a team tournament, but still interesting exercise. Poland would also end up terribly low. They also have like one player who does really well here. What about strength of schedule? Because based on this, I can sort of calculate what the strength of schedule was because I know what teams faced each other in what rounds. So I can just, add up the team score, which is sort of an indication of how good the players were-ish. I know it's not a pure indication, right? But sort of, which means that the teams who had the lowest score in strength of schedule would actually be the teams who faced off against the strongest enemies, because I'm adding up all of their enemies' scores. Now, if we look at that, then Australia actually had the hardest weekend. They had the hardest matchups, the hardest strength of schedule, whereas Germany lags behind both Spain and Poland. And my team, US, too, you can see the submarine that we made bring us into 3rd place, right? Because our strength of schedule is a lot worse than everyone else's in the top 5. So that, again, is an interesting matchup, right? Where you can see the submarining happening for some of these teams that sort of jump back in. But Australia did have a really hard weekend of teams that they faced off against. And Germany, of course, faced off against Spain twice, so that was hard as well. There was also, I at least questioned the sanity of using Demolition in such a team tournament. And I'm on the record of saying I think 60% of all games will end up in draw. Not quite 60% did, but more than 50% did, because 23 in 40 games of Demolition ended up in a draw. I don't think Demolition is suitable for tournament play. You want results, you don't want draws. And finally, I've talked a little bit about the star player effect. Now, looking down over the teams, 15 out of 20 teams had 1 or 2 players that did significantly better than the rest of their team. So, for instance, on my team, we had 2 players, me and Corey, who were placed 5th and 6th in the individual ranking, right? So 2 players that did significantly better than the rest. Most teams had 1 player that did significantly better than the rest of their team. Examples of this are Australia, Poland, USA 2, my team, and USA 3. Where 1 player, in USA 3 we had 1 player that was 4th, and then the rest of the players were 45 and down, so placed bottom half, right? In Poland, we had 1 player that was 3rd, and the rest were 25 and down. Australia, Aaron came individually 1st, but the rest of his team was 30 place and down. So we do have a star player effect. There are a lot of teams where there's 1 player that's significantly better, or 2 possibly, than the rest of the team in the individual ranking. Now, some teams, and when I talked to Felix, and you'll have seen this in my interview with him, he talked about a balanced team, and that is true. Some teams were absolutely balanced. So, for instance, if we look at the German team, they had all of their players in the top 20. All of them. And the same can be said for instance, Wales. Wales had all of their players between 28th and 53rd place, so lumped together in the middle. So there are some teams that have a significant balance, right, where 1 player is not jumping up the ranking. So of the 20 teams that attended the WTC, 5 of them were balanced. So they were all of the players were landing within 25 places of each other. But of these, only Germany and Spain were in the top bracket. Even the top 10 of teams, only Germany and Spain were in that bracket. The rest of them were below that. So does that signify anything? I don't know, but it is an interesting debate, right? Because one of these balanced teams won, and the second balanced team came very close to winning, right? Spain too. So an interesting thought process here. I think perhaps that if you have, you can do well with 1, maybe 2 star players. Can you win though? That is the question. Maybe that is the secret to the Spanish and German success at multiple WTCs. So, at the end here, I want to thank Spurley for sending me all of the matchups and the results. That was great. Thank you so much. I have way more data than I can possibly deal with. But, always nice to have a look at it again. So this weekend, I'm off to TO Zealand Open. And after that, for me, I'm going to Jutland Open. And then in the autumn, I have World Open War. Tournaments everywhere. That's it from me today. See ya. Cheers.